Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm happy to welcome today Libby Bennett and Peter Elwell, who are from Groundworks. Thank you so much for being here today. Just so folks know, Libby Bennett is the executive director, and Peter Elwell is a member of the board, but he just spent a year on staff as Libby got up to speed transitioning from her role in development to executive director. So there's been a lot of changes at Groundworks lately, folks.
Indeed, there has, for sure. Thanks for having us, Olga.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And I admit that was kind of a rough introduction because part of my brain is still sitting with something that Peter said before we started recording that is to me just so poignant. I am currently sitting in my childhood home, which I sadly, bittersweet, inherited from a family member. I believe Libby is sitting in her childhood home, and Peter can see his childhood home from where he is. And it just, given that we will be talking about issues around folks who are struggling with housing, it just feels so poignant to me for the three of us to be sitting in or near housing that was not only stable for us as children, but now stable for us as adults. And it's just, yeah, that's really sitting with me right now. I don't know, Libby, what does that bring up anything for you?
Definitely. I mean, I was saying earlier, I feel like my own housing is among my greatest privileges in my life that that I, with the ability to have a place to be stable, it really is the footing for sort of all else I am able to do. And so, yeah, I bought my house from my mom, who had bought it from her dad. And so it's certainly a story of my own white privilege, my own sort of economic privilege. And yeah, it makes a huge deal in my life.
Mm-hmm. How about you,
Likewise.
Peter?
And yeah, so my details are a little different, but my feeling, both the poignancy and the privilege, are the same as what you two have expressed. Um, and it reminds me also of something that I think as a society we too often lose track of or don't pay sufficient attention to, which is, when we're looking at like the data of homelessness, and solving the problem of homelessness, it can become very like clinical and analytical. Um, but there's a couple of hundred people in Brattleboro who are unsheltered, and there's a couple of thousand people in our state who are unsheltered, and each one of those is a human being, and not feeling the security and family history and other aspects, both practical and emotional, that we appreciate in our lives. So I think it's important as we have the conversation to keep in mind, this isn't stuff. These are people.
Thank you. I'd love to start with both of you around sort of the framework of perspective around, because we've been talking a lot as a state around our housing crisis, both for folks who are dealing with unstable housing or who are unhoused, but also we have a shortage of housing across all what real estate agents will call all price points. And so we've had that perspective a while for on our housing shortage. But for both of you, you're both working with Groundworks, but you've both been in different positions, and now you're in new leadership roles. I'm wondering if those experiences, having worked with Groundworks for you, Libby, in development, but now as an executive director, and Peter as the interim executive director, now a board member, but before that, town manager for Brattleboro, has these different points of view, like where you were sitting looking at the issue, has that taught you anything? Has that changed anything for you when you think about our housing issues in Vermont?
I'll go.
I know, I'm like,
I was
ready.
like, gee, did I just ask a bad question?
Little question here. I'm trying to pick at the details.
So a quick aside, we have an organizational norm in the staff at Groundworks of like being comfortable with some silence and sharing the microphone a lot. So whether it's in meetings or social settings or whatever, there's a really living the collaborative, right? Part of Groundworks Collaborative. And I so appreciated that when I was, in deep with the staff. And so there are often moments in this setting, it feels more awkward. So I jumped in. There are often moments when we're wrestling with something together at Groundworks where that silence might go on for a good long time, a time that would in many other settings make us uncomfortable.
Like radio.
And then whoever's ready will say, I'll go. And the conversation begins. So I'll go. For me, yes, of course, being in different roles, playing a part differently at different times, in working on these sets of issues, and what you learn along the way from both your own individual different roles and then the different people that you're dealing with, all of that, yes, accumulates in a way that is helpful and informs whatever we're doing now and then what we will be doing soon. The more profound takeaway I have from thinking about being involved with these issues as town manager and then for a brief time as a board member and then as a staff member and now as a board member again at Groundworks is actually just the degree to which the harm has increased, the degree of crisis has increased for us. And so that's true about housing at all price points. And it's good that there's a tremendous amount of energy and money flowing towards addressing that because fundamentally, more housing will create not only availability, but more affordability. And in the long run will put us in a better position to address homelessness. But in the meantime, what we've seen is astounding increases in the number of people who are experiencing homelessness and not nearly the same increase in resources to be able to support them and help folks transition through that experience back into stable housing.
Thank you, Peter. Libby?
Yeah, I mean, I think about the shortage of housing in Windham County, just as having been here doing this work for the past decade and more, about how we've been in this housing crisis for over a decade. We've been at crisis level for an incredibly long time. Before the pandemic, we were 0.5% vacancy rate on anything that was considered affordable in the community, and that may be the sort of housing market overall. I can't recall back to that. But then we know that during the pandemic, people of all strata of society wanted to make Vermont home during the pandemic. People were buying up houses sight unseen. Like this is the story we've got. Over the last couple of years, there was a period we were hearing from people every week saying, my building has been sold. I've been a tenant in good standing, but now I'm being asked to leave and I can't afford to go anywhere else. I'm going to be homeless and I'm curious about seeking shelter with Groundworks. So we have seen sort of anecdotally that the crisis has worsened. I don't think anyone's done the research to see what that percentage is now, but a healthy market should have a 4 to 6% vacancy rate. And we've been at 0.5% for the past many, many years. And we know that anecdotally it's worse than that. This housing shortage is I think it's people are so quick to look to people who are experiencing homelessness as having created this situation for themselves or having made bad choices. But ultimately, I would argue that, this is a set of policy failures that over time, we have not grown the housing market to accommodate the population. And we're like, this is if people are willing to see it that way and see that our only way out of this is through coordinated resources and political will, that these projects take an incredibly long time to, for housing to be built. We're starting on the level of looking at zoning, looking at the sort of regulations that allow us to build more housing. But we know that it'll be years before people have keys in hand to affordable housing. And so, I mean, to me, that's the sort of story of this long arc is we've been in crisis for, I don't know if I want to say decades, but certainly for more than a decade.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing I keep coming back to, a refrain that I have heard through many conversations, but it seems to be moving up the income ladder. I remember speaking with your predecessor, Libby, years ago, Josh Davis, and he was talking about how hard it was moving people from the Morningside shelter because someone would come in and a shelter was supposed to shelter for like a couple weeks or maybe a month. But then because there was no place for someone to go, no affordable place for someone to go at the time, the shelter was becoming full-time housing for a lot of people. And I remember him using the phrase, the shelter system's a little stuck. Well, it's interesting to me how over the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic, I'm hearing more and more people say, well, our housing system's a little stuck. For example, I was talking to a real estate agent the other day who says, I have a number of folks who are getting on in age. They want to downsize. They want to move closer to town. And that house could free up, become multifamily. It could become, young family, like it could house new people. However, this couple has nowhere to go. So they're stuck in that house that could become better housing for more people. And it's interesting to me how it just seems like I'm hearing that phrase circle through the housing conversation.
Yeah, it's a bit of gridlock. That's a housing market. I hear one of my favorite examples is listening to our Congresswoman Becca Balint talk about how they've wanted to move and they don't need a house as big as they have, or they could even they have the ability to move, but there's nowhere to go to free up something that's affordable that would make their house available to someone else. And so this is it's not just a conversation about homelessness. It's a conversation about housing overall. There's a conversation here about short-term rentals. There's a conversation about gentrification. We have this, this is the state of our community in 2024. It's not new necessarily, but here we are with a number of different angles on how to solve this problem.
Yeah, and just to insert a couple of data points into that. I've learned this recently, and it was really surprising to me, and I don't think I've fully wrapped my head around it, but it is an important aspect of the way in which we in Vermont are attractive to people who have substantial financial resources from away. And either want to spend some time here, or now in the digital age might want to move here and be able to work from here at least some of the time, and how that crowds out people who aren't making as much money and aren't sitting on wealth. So the short-term rental for years, I was focused also on short-term rental as being like the increasing numbers of short-term rental were a great concern because it was taking units that could have been year-round housing and turning them into visitation.
I think I know where you're going.
It's a true thing, and it turns out it's a small thing compared to the overall degree of second home ownership. So the numbers are actually 3% of the housing units in Vermont are made available through Airbnb or Vrbo or whatever, but as short-term rentals. 17% of housing units in Vermont are owned by people as second homes.
Yeah.
That's a huge number. And it speaks to, I think, another part of the systemic failure. So we certainly have had systemic failure in housing and are devoting, I think, appropriate significant resources and funding to addressing that aspect of this. specifically speaking about the human impact, though, there are some other systemic failures I think we need to name that are contributing causes of the degree of hardship and the numbers of people who are at risk of experiencing homelessness. So, one of those for sure is I want to be really careful not to conflate the opioid and addiction epidemic with homelessness, nor to conflate the mental health, mental illness crisis that we're in as a society with homelessness. But there certainly is a lot of overlap in those various aspects. We serve some people who do have their challenges compounded by these other systemic failures, as well as lots of people who aren't experiencing homelessness, who are experiencing addiction and or mental illness. And so the failures, some of them just like unfortunate, and others actually like the intentional outcomes of changes in those systems that have left people behind, the compounding impact of these various different things. And then underlying all of it is like how our economy functions, right? Our economy functions basically to generate wealth for those who already have it and have a lot of power, and have everybody else living, near the edge or beyond it. And so when we have such a vast majority of people who live in some manner of precariousness, 20% of people in Vermont are food insecure. Anytime we're gathered in a group of 5, statistically, likely one of us doesn't have enough food to eat every day. And so when you think about these various aspects and the fact that even people who are housed are so close to having something go wrong, a major health issue, the sale of their rental, where there's a sale of the building where they rent, other kinds of things very often beyond their own control, that then are the tipping point for them. And now they're a person experiencing homelessness. And that's why we have seen these numbers go from, maybe like a few dozen people to a few hundred people in Brattleboro. And likewise, that same kind of proportional increase across the state.
I'm glad you brought up short-term rentals. I feel in Windham County, when we have, ski areas in our county, and I don't want to slag off the ski areas, but I do feel that we need to give the second home market, keep an eye on it, because it does, it's big in our county. In fact, I was talking to the economic development guru for the town of Dover for another article, and he said, and that this year's grand list is now 90% second homes. And he said, one thing Dover's working on right now is how do we maintain a sense of community? Because while we're very happy to welcome our community members who own second homes, we're very glad they're here, but they can't volunteer on the fire department. They can't serve on the select board. They can't serve on the school board. They don't volunteer at the library consistently. And so how do you keep that community going when 10% of the community is doing the heavy lift, and a lot of folks who maybe work in the community can't afford to live there? And that, I think, is really something to keep an eye on, because it gets into the fabric of a town's ability or capacity to manage what it needs to manage when you don't have enough people there year round.
Yeah.
Libby, I'm curious for you. I know in the second half you have some exciting news that we want to talk about, but before we get there, I'm just curious, given all the conversations that are happening around housing insecurity and homelessness, what do you feel is being left out? What are people not grasping?
That's a great question. I think that we still hear a lot of misconceptions in the community, about assuming that people who are experiencing homelessness here in this community maybe are not from here, or that if people could just get a job. I think there are a lot of complexities to this issue, and we have this tendency to think in shortcuts. We think in these shortcut frames that say, like, if I see someone, who is, potentially having mental health crisis, or is that maybe that person must be homeless, they must be, it's just like conflating all of these issues into one. And I think that we have this sort of myopic view of what's happening in this town, and where people often, we don't take the time to suss out the complexities about what's going on and the various challenges that maybe are surrounding people that, sure, are representative of multiple broken systems that are ending up with people, not getting the right types of services, not being able to do this, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of these expectations that we set as a society around what people should be able to do. And, it's back to this question of, our own housing privilege. And, I think that it's very easy, if you've been a person, and I have been a person who has had stable people in my life who were never going to let me fail, but they would always be there for me, and I would, always have that stability. And I think a lot of the people that we serve, or a lot of the people who are being underserved in our community, are people who maybe didn't have someone who was just going to be there and make sure that they didn't fail. And so when you have this worldview of, I did this for myself, and everyone should be able to do it the way I did. I think that is a piece that, if people are just willing to suss out all of those complexities and understand that we can't paint everyone with the same brush, that each 308 households on the coordinated entry master list we can talk about what that means. So 308 households are experiencing homelessness in the Brattleboro district right now today. These are 308 completely different stories about how people landed in this situation. So,
and we should just note, for folks who may not know this, when you say households, that could be one person, it could be a family of 5. So Absolutely. It's not just 308 people, it's more than that.
That's right. And I'd like to put a little finer point on the piece about how each one of those households and each one of those people has their own story and their own set of both, sort of the journey that they've traveled, and what are they dealing with now? What is it that they want and need now to be able to move back into stable housing? Because having had the privilege to spend a year with the Groundworks staff, in the work day in, day out, one of the things I came to just admire so greatly and appreciate, and just I think it's super important, I think the community ought to know, is the degree to which Groundworks employees develop individual person-to-person relationships with each of the folks that Groundworks is providing services to. And so, it's not, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for helping folks move forward through homelessness and then out of homelessness. And it takes time, and it takes the building of relationships for that to for the work to be effective. And Groundworks takes that time and invests that way in individuals and households. And it's a really impressive thing to watch happen as it's, sometimes there'll be a new person who shows up at 54 South Main Street who's unknown to any of the team. And the process by which that person is welcomed into this already existing community, with a very complex little community. And then the way in which they are supported by staff to actually, where the staff actually learns about the person, as much as the person is willing to share, to be able to then be a partner in taking the steps necessary, not just to connect to like the services, but actually to help build that momentum. What Libby was saying about those of us who've been fortunate enough to have people in our lives who wouldn't let us fail. Groundworks becomes that, at least for this moment in time, for the many people that we serve.
Peter, Libby, thank you. We have just a few more minutes left in this segment, and I'd love if we would quickly remind people the Groundworks has a few different components. I believe you have 2 buildings on South Street. You have the Morningside shelter over by Morningside.
Morningside
Yes.
Thank you.
Road, yes.
And we're going to talk about that in the second half. But would you just remind people like the purpose of each of those buildings?
Sure. And you didn't mention FoodWorks, which is probably our largest program by volume. We're serving over 4,400 of our neighbors through the FoodWorks program this year. We're at 141 Canal Street in our little pop-up store there. So we on South Main Street, we have 54 South Main Street operates 24/7, 365 days a year as our daytime drop-in center and overnight shelter for 34 people can stay here overnight. So people come in for day services, which would include coming in to take a shower, coming in to cook a meal, coming in to talk with a case manager and get housing paperwork pulled together. Doing laundry, finding community and someone to talk to. Maybe we need air conditioning that day, or that we have inclement weather of some sort. So we have the vast majority of people who are using our services are coming in for daytime services, and then people can sign up to have a bed for overnight. We open a waiting list at 9 o'clock every morning, and people can get on the waiting list. If you stayed here the night before, you have the first chance at a bed for tonight. But we do see, and we've seen quite a bit of turnover in that waiting list, as well as we'll continue to as we move into the summer months. Our Morningside shelter on Royal Road has been closed since last April, when we tragically lost our friend and coworker, Leah Rosin Pritchard, there. We can talk more about the sort of future thoughts and plans for that program. We also operate together with Windham and Windsor Housing Trust, who own the Chalet and Great River Terrace. So Groundworks has staff on site there to provide sort of milieu services, but also case management. So supportive services right on site in programs designed to be permanent housing for people exiting homelessness. And so those are sort of our 5 location spots. We have a number of different programs that also operate out of some of those locations as well.
And you also, I believe you partner with, is it BMH for HealthWorks?
Yeah, so also on South Main Street is sort of the headquarters of our HealthWorks ACT team. This is a program that has grown over the years. I'm very proud. I wrote the first grant that helped bring the first retreat social worker to do on-site psychotherapy services at Morningside Shelter. So that was back in 2014. And over time, this program has grown to add a registered nurse from Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. We've had licensed drug and alcohol counselors join us from HCRS. And then during the pandemic, we noted that we needed a lot more support on that team. We went from serving 33 people in our seasonal overflow shelter, plus 30 people at Morningside, to all of a sudden, when people moved into the motels, we were suddenly serving 3 times as many people in homeless services through Groundworks. So we needed more staff on that team, and they added a psychiatric nurse practitioner and another nurse practitioner from BMH. Over time, then it was noted that we needed a greater level of service for people with particularly complex mental health and health challenges. And so That team worked for quite some time to research and develop the first ACT team model for the state of Vermont. ACT teams have been around since about the 1970s after deinstitutionalization, so in many places all over the country. And so this is an evidence-based model that allows people to have, I'm sorry, there's a truck going by. I don't know if you can hear that. Allows for an inpatient level of support on a street level or outreach basis. And so we've got a team that is a mobile team, and they'll go around to serve people engaged in groundwork services, but might be living unsheltered, might be living in permanent supportive housing, might be staying here in our shelter, and being able to bring health and mental health services directly to where people are.
And 4 more things. So
more things.
Yeah, it's really, when you start digging in, actually, it's really impressive. And there's a story there that I won't digress into now, but maybe in the second half we should tell a little bit of the history, because Libby is the best person to tell it, about how Groundworks grew into being such a robust organization, providing all these different kinds of supports, most of which is focused on supporting people who are experiencing homelessness, but some of which is actually helping to keep people from falling into homelessness because of the supports that we provide, for instance, through FoodWorks. But 4 other things that Groundworks does include case management services for individual clients, where each case manager has as many as 20 individuals that they're supporting. And those people might be living in the motels, they might be living at 54 South Main Street, they might be just out in the community, but they're folks who have engaged with Groundworks and are receiving the support that our case management team can provide to help with the variety of ways in which just navigating systems can be daunting, if not impossible, for folks in terms of connecting to the right providers of certain kinds of services. And even for folks who are in sort of particularly difficult circumstances, regaining their identification papers. Because think about it, if you didn't have a stable place to sleep at night, you probably also don't have a stable place to store your things, including your important papers. And so it's a pretty common phenomenon that people need to actually redo all of that to connect with Social Security, driver's license, that sort of thing. So case management is an important piece that's done. There's also a sub piece. There's actually just an individual employee, but it's a really important function for folks who struggle to manage their money well, right? They've got some money they can manage, and some income and outgo that they need to be able to manage, but can use some help in that process. We have a representative payee program, and Libby, I think 60 or 70 folks on that roster at this time?
I think we're about 55 people right now, all of whom receive SSI or SSDI, Social Security Disability benefits. So that's the eligibility window there.
And so Groundworks becomes the helper officially. There's all kinds of like official relationship there, but it makes it so that a Groundworks employee can receive the funds, pay the bills, help the person understand like how to do that better and more independently. And so we see people come on and go off of the rep payee roster, but an important additional service that's often beyond the scope of what most people think Groundworks does. We also have a new team, an outreach team of 5 people who are out in the community every day, because one of the things that we realized during the past year was we needed to, again, be doing something Groundworks had done in the past, but hadn't done since the pandemic, which was have people who are out connecting with individuals who are experiencing homelessness in the community, but not yet engaged with Groundworks. So instead of waiting for people to come to 54 and say, you know, I'd like to see what help you might be able to provide, or I'm experiencing this and want to do that. Instead of waiting for them, we go out and make contact and develop relationship and find ways to support people who are experiencing this that way out in the town. And the last thing is there's a landlord liaison, again, a one-person position, but somebody who helps the other members of Groundworks who are doing different things to support individuals with both the connecting to landlords for housing, as well as helping people stay housed when there's a landlord issue that needs to be addressed so that it doesn't become a crisis that forces somebody out.
Thank you. Thank you. We have to go to break to hear from some of our underwriters here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro. But hang tight. Libby, Bennett, Peter Elwell, and I will be back after the break. Welcome back to the second half of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW 107.7 LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. If you're just joining us, I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and I'm speaking with Libby Bennett and Peter Elwell from Groundworks. Libby Bennett serves as the executive director, and Peter Elwell is one of the board members for the organization. So, Libby, I want to start with you. Oh, I can't start with you, because I have to do two things first.
Oh, okay.
I have to say thank you to Brattleboro Community Television for taking the video version of our show and sharing it with PEG stations around Vermont. So thank you, BCTV. And I also have to remind people, since my lovely co-host, Emily Kornheiser, is busy with the legislature right now and can't say this, that the views and opinions of the folks on the Montpelier Happy Hour are those of the host and the guest. No one else, not the organizations they work for, not the radio station, not the platform, any of these versions of the show appear on, not even, as I like to say, their houseplants. So, back to the show. Libby, back to you.
Yes, Olga.
So we touched on this topic in the first half of the show, talking about misconceptions about folks who are dealing with housing insecurity or who are homeless. And, one of the myths I hear that come up over and over again is that people are flocking to Brattleboro primarily for the services. If we didn't have the services, we wouldn't have homelessness. This is kind of the myth I keep hearing. And I'm wondering, in your work, is that something you can speak to?
Well, I can speak to it, but there's also data. One of the research studies that we point to is the recently, I think it was 2022, a book came out called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And it's the largest research study that's been done on literal homelessness in the United States in the last 25 years. The authors of the book looked at people in California. And before you say, oh, but that's California and this is Vermont, Vermont has the second highest per capita rate of homelessness, right behind California. We're dealing with a very different, I'm sorry, very similar housing crises here in Vermont and the state of California. It's due to a shortage of housing. And so you look at communities where there are very high rents and very scarce housing available, you will have a homelessness crisis, regardless of whether it's a rural area or an urban area, regardless of whether people think, oh, there's a lot of wealth in that area. There will be a housing crisis where you have very high rents and scarce housing. And so in these ways, Vermont looks very similar to California. And so what we've always thought of as sort of the anecdotal, like it doesn't make any sense to play out that myth. They now have data to refute that coming out of California. But what they found in California is that the vast majority, we're talking like 90% of the people who are homeless in a given area, we're talking San Francisco, Portland, Oregon, et cetera. People are from those communities, have family ties, grew up in those communities. If they were away, they came back because of family. We find the same thing when we poll people here at Groundworks. So when you look at, one of the things we survey people on is the zip code of their last permanent address. And for the vast majority of people that we serve, about 75% of people that we're serving, if not from Brattleboro proper, then from within Windham County, that they are from here. If we look a little bit broader than that at surrounding counties, we're right here in the corner of the state. So if we look at the counties that surround us in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and then if we look at the entire state of Vermont, we get to 90% of the people who we're serving are from these areas. Ultimately, we know that in a rural setting, Brattleboro acts as a hub town. So we're not just, we're the community where people are accessing services, from a wide radius of rural towns around us. And so ultimately, we are finding people are from here and not picking up and moving from elsewhere in the country. I think part of that myth is people say, oh, we have such great benefits here in Vermont. And so we're very attractive to people. And we could get into, there's also this myth around some people just want to be homeless. So it's like, oh, there are people who are saying it's a great place to be homeless. It's like, really? We have cold winters.
December, 20 degrees below zero. Yeah.
And so we did a little bit of research on exactly what could someone get if they showed up here in Brattleboro from another state. Immediately, when we're looking at accessing benefits in the state of Vermont, anyone who's going to go and apply for SNAP benefits, or sometimes called food, in the old days, we used to call them food stamps, SNAP benefits, or what we call general assistance benefits for people who are literally experiencing literal homelessness. That general assistance benefit is $56 a month. So if you think about how much did you spend on getting here from somewhere else, it's not a whole lot to reimburse those costs. People can get a single person, if you're just coming on your own, a single person could get as little as $23 a month in SNAP benefits, up to a maximum for a bigger household of $281 a month. And people could access Medicaid here, but you also, in order to get those things, you have to show proof of residency in the state of Vermont. So, whether that means you came into town yesterday and you slept outdoors, and it depends on your circumstances when you're pulling up to the state offices to apply for these benefits. But ultimately, you have to show that you've closed out any benefits that you are receiving in another state. And so, this hypothetical person doing that would have had to close their benefits before traveling here. And so just these, it's very easy to tell these stories in these shortcuts that help people make sense of what they think might be happening. But there are so many regulations and so many requirements to accessing these benefits that are designed to weed out people who may be trying to game the system in that way. It just doesn't pan out that way. It's just not, it doesn't.
Most of those services require recertification on a regular interval. So the amount of just administrative work that a person has to do to stay eligible for these small amounts of assistance is pretty staggering. That's where case management services can be really important, is to help folks navigate that. But it is a myth that people see Vermont as the public assistance promised land and come from great distances to access it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking some time with that, because it is a story that keeps coming back over and over and over again. Which leads me to my next question. The legislature is in session right now. They have been working on a number of different housing bills. So I just wanted to touch quickly on this concept of policy. And as folks who are on the ground doing the work, any thoughts around some of the policy that's either coming out of the legislature, or that, we've done a lot of work around housing that maybe needs a different perspective? Either of you have thoughts on that?
I'd like to share two. One is to reduce the bureaucracy that's attached to any of these. That's an easy lift, it seems to me, is to I've actually heard it referred to as administrative violence. to not impose such great burdens. Imagine for those of us who are more comfortable and privileged in our lives, if to maintain aspects of that, like to be allowed to stay in your house past the end of the month, or something related to the food that we access comfortably and easily. But, all the different ways in which we're fortunate. Imagine if in order to maintain that good fortune, we actually had to go through multiple different kinds of administrative processes every month just to keep it. That's a burden we can relieve by just choosing to, by recognizing that these are the impacts of societal failures, and society is adding to the harm by creating such administrative burdens. So at the risk, and I recognize there would be people who would object to what I'm saying because, potentially from nearby, not from the other side of the country, but maybe from other parts of New England, potentially that might draw more people into Vermont, right? If in fact we reduce the amount of administrative harm that was being done, maybe word would get around and folks from New Hampshire and Massachusetts would be willing to somehow find their way here. I think that's a risk worth taking, that we provide support and a way forward for some other humans that may come to us from elsewhere by being the kind of place that actually is trying to address societal and systemic harms rather than, continue with the sort of traditional bureaucratic methods. That's number one, and I think not imaginary. That's a thing we could do if we simply chose to do it.
Yeah.
The harder one from a public policy point of view is to spend enough money to actually serve more people and serve them better. And so, yes, on the housing front, there's millions and millions of dollars being put into supporting the creation of more housing. And yes, ultimately, that will be the most important thing that can happen to address this on the long arc is more housing, less scarcity, lower prices, absolutely. So it's good that the state is doing that. And simultaneously, the state is feeling this pressure of, we have to build the housing. We have to focus on that. Focusing on the short-term solutions is, too expensive, right? And so there's a very fluid conversation going on in Montpelier right now. It's not clear where it's going to land, but it is clear already from what's been discussed and changes that have been made. And there was proposed legislation that would have kept people who have been experiencing homelessness, keep everyone sheltered in the manner, or at least have the opportunity, each person would have the opportunity to be sheltered in the same manner as we've been doing during the pandemic, using federal money, to have programs that would be modified from how the motel program has been operating, but give that same opportunity to people going forward. So as a state, we'd be committing ourselves to not requiring anyone to sleep outside. And that's changed. That's not going to happen. It's not clear yet exactly what's going to come out of the legislature this year, but we haven't decided that we have the commitment as a state and as a society to make sure everybody has a roof over their heads at night. And we've decided instead that people will be allowed under certain circumstances for defined periods of time to access shelter. But when their circumstances are different or they've used up their number of nights, then we as a state are continuing to say, well, that's as much as we can do. And that person's going to have to sleep outside. And I believe that's wrong. And I believe we have enough wealth in our society that we can do better.
So I just want to pause there, Peter, and hope listeners really took that in, what you just said, that because it was true during the pandemic, we made a commitment as a state that folks would have housing, and it led to the hotel program. You can say that was great or not, but people were housed. And so I just want to make sure people heard what Peter said, that it, to a certain extent, is a choice that we as a society are making with our policies about whether it is okay with us for people to be unhoused and sleep outside, that we are making that choice. Did I phrase that properly, Peter?
You did.
Okay.
Thanks, Olga.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And that why I feel that's so important, folks, as since this is a show where we try to talk about the stories we tell about ourselves as a society. I think Libby mentioned earlier that a lot of folks are like, well, someone's homeless because of their own choices. And it's so much more complex than that, and that there are policy choices that have failed folks and left them homeless as well.
And
Um,
we're seeing now, Olga, if you don't mind me saying, we're seeing now there's the Supreme Court is about to take up the case from Grants Pass, Oregon, where a number of unsheltered members of the community are challenging the city. And this is not this happens to be the community that is coming before the Supreme Court, but this is happening in communities all over the United States, where there are ordinances about no sleeping, no camping outside. In some cases, this is not just, it's not okay to put a tent up here, but it's not okay to roll up a t-shirt and lay your head on it without getting fined or ticketed for trying to find a place to sleep. It's a human function. Our bodies need sleep. There is no shelter bed available. And people are ultimately collecting so many tickets to be asked to serve as much as a 30-day jail sentence for sleeping. And it's there. So it's, if we talk about sort of a slippery slope in policy, like this is where we get down to like, really, we're going to criminalize people sleeping outdoors because there's literally no shelter bed anywhere. So just the sort of array of how that looks in each community in terms of policies that are.
well, what's making me laugh about that, Libby, I hope this isn't too far off base, or that I'm being really inappropriate, but communities where folks are being criminalized for sleeping, they build up so many tickets because, obviously if they could pay the tickets, they probably wouldn't be sleeping outside. But now we're going to spend money as a society to house them in a prison when I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's crazy making. There's no, the idea that by criminalizing it here in this community, we'll ask these people who we'd rather not have them here anyway to move on to another community. It's inhumane. It's the reason it's going before the Supreme Court is it's, cruel and unusual punishment for it.
There is currently case law in the West from a similar case in Boise, Idaho, about 4 or 5 years ago, that actually found that these kinds of policies are cruel and unusual punishment. That if you can't provide a shelter bed, you must allow a person to sleep in public spaces in your community, because where else will they go? And to criminalize that act is cruel and unusual punishment. That's the current case law, current state of the law, based on that ruling in that Western U.S. district. I don't remember the number of the district court, but
Interesting.
And so what's happening in Grants Pass is they knew they were enforcing the ordinance and writing all these tickets in violation of the prevailing current case law in order to get this up to a higher court. And they succeeded at that. And I believe the arguments were heard yesterday at the Supreme Court. We'll see a ruling sometime in the weeks ahead. And it's really scary to think about the potential that the court might rule that Grants Pass is okay to do that and change the case law, change the prevailing law. Because as Libby says, then, what we're going to end up with is communities, making it impossible for people who are already suffering such dire circumstances to even do the simple act of laying their head down in a public park. And the implications of that for the intentional increase in human suffering is staggering. It's pathetic, actually, that we as a society would make that choice. But some of us will make that choice if given the option.
We in the last few minutes we have, I just want to shift gears, and sorry to make that feel a little whiplashy. But there is some good news coming out of Groundworks, and that is there's a lot of good news coming out of Groundworks. But one of them is you will be replacing the Morningside shelter with, which previously was a house that was kind of repurposed as a shelter, but you're going to replace it with an actual purpose-built shelter. Tell me more about that, Libby.
Sure. We've operated as Morningside Shelter on Royal Road in Brattleboro since 1979. It's an old farmhouse that was gifted to the organization back in the 70s for the purpose of running a shelter. And we've learned in our shelter on South Main Street what a huge difference it makes to be able to operate, to design a facility for the program that you want to operate, as opposed to squeezing a program into whatever available space you have. So we've learned that, the shelter in this building on South Main Street started out in a church basement with people sleeping on the floor. We moved into a dormitory. We were able to say, this is what we need the space to be to serve the function that we need it to serve, and do so in a safer and more efficient way. And so we will have the opportunity, if all of the funding comes through, and so that's sort of the next step, is to make sure that we can afford to do this, to design and meticulously build this new space for the program as we want to run it, that we would not have to be confined to a particular place. I think the story the story of what's happening at Morningside is we really want to reopen that space in a way that's completely unrecognizable. We had tragedy there, and we want to make sure that it's a more inviting space for people to come back into, for us to send staff back into that space. This is a heavy and vulnerable situation, and we noted that if we were going to open up or do major renovations there, that we would be up against all kinds of code that, quite frankly, we've been granted ability to operate there for years without having to worry about a number of different things, that once we started moving a wall here and there, that, we would be highly regulated in the process, and that we would end up serving fewer people at a great expense. Mm-hmm. And so we have worked together with the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation to make sure that it's okay to take this building down. And we want to design a really well thought out new facility with great ability to really keep an eye on what's going on there, and to be able to provide up to 40 beds there on that site.
Mm-hmm. And how many beds does the current building have?
We had 30 beds in the shelter there. Yeah.
Congratulations. Just so folks know, I was part of a group of community feng shui folks who did some feng shui work on the Morningside shelter years ago now. And I am so excited that you're going to have a new purpose-built building. Say that 3 times fast. I just, the farmhouse was lovely, and it did the best it could, but there's a concept in feng shui called cross-purposing, where you try to use one thing, like a living room, for a bedroom. And it doesn't work, because it's not what the space was designed to do. And so it will never properly be a bedroom, and therefore someone will never properly really get a good night's rest, is kind of how the concept works. And so I just think having a building that's designed for your needs and your intentions is, oh, I'm so excited for you. It just makes me very happy. Do you have a timeline yet for the project? What's the next steps?
If the funding that we've applied for comes through, then we may be looking at construction beginning in the spring of 2025 for opening a shelter in the spring of 2026. But it all hinges on whether we have the funds in place. Construction is much more expensive now than it was when we built on South Main Street. So we're certainly looking at a number of challenges ahead in order to get there. But
and will you be doing any local fundraising or anything like that?
We will. We'll need to learn about our major funders' participation before we know how much we need to raise. But we, in all likelihood, this summer will be launching some private fundraising to help make it happen.
You've been put on alert, community.
Thank you, Olga.
Peter, anything you want to add about the new building?
I guess I would just wrap a ribbon around what Libby said with, I mean, it's just a win-win-win-win. So we think this is going to be a better place once we've been able to secure the funding and complete the planning and build it and move in and do the programming there. This is going to be a better program for the residents of the shelter. It's going to be a better facility for the staff to function within. It's going to be better for our neighbors at Morningside Commons. We're working with them around some of the details of the building and how we intend to utilize the building so that we can make sure that we're a good neighbor and that they know how to be supportive of the folks that we serve and the work that we do. And because it'll be 40 beds instead of 30, it's going to be better also for the broader community. We're going to have a greater capacity yet again, an opportunity for Groundworks to seize a moment and have greater capacity to provide the essential services that we do. So I appreciate you saving this piece for the end of our talk today, our conversation, because it's so filled with hope and promise and optimism. And we look forward to just step by step, continuing forward to make it happen.
Congratulations. So we are just out of time, but I wanted to make sure, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on or leave listeners with before we end?
I think that this is a good moment for me to speak on behalf of all of our staff to thank Peter for his time serving on the staff. I think it's been said many times in the last week or so, but Peter certainly did not know what he was signing up for not in totality when he agreed to come onto the staff to join us from the board. We've been through certainly a lot over the last year plus, and we wouldn't be where we are and approaching the work in this resilient way that we are without the many contributions of Peter Elwell. So thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, as you know. And just to the community, I would say we're so fortunate to have Libby at the helm and this amazing team of people at Groundworks. It was a privilege for me to work among them day in and day out. And it will continue to be for me to be able to support this work and this team as a board member. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you to both of you. Now, folks want to learn more about Groundworks, or if they need to access services, where can they go?
We do have on our website, which is groundworksvt.org, forms there if you want to reach out to us for help. People can call the front desk at the drop-in center as a good starting point to start out with questions. That number is 802-257-5415. I'm just giving you an old number. 802-257-5415. And if you dial extension 1000, you'll get a live person at the front desk.
Thank you. And just for kicks and giggles, listeners, I'm going to link in the show notes. I'll link to Groundworks, but I'm also going to link to the housing wage information. And I'm the organization I'm blanking on right now, but what they do is they look at what market value houses are in a community and what it would take, how many hours a week someone would have to work to afford that housing. And I think in Vermont, for a single person with a 1-bedroom earning minimum wage, I think they have to work, it was like 73 hours a week.
I was going to say 87. They update it every year. It's the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They do incredible work, and you can look at every state in the nation and see what the housing wage is there to rent even just a modest apartment at the general sort of fair market rent.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to include it, folks, because I think it really brings home some of the things we're talking about at a very like nuts and bolts level. But on that note, I know both of you need to get to a meeting, so I'm going to say thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the Montpelier Happy Hour on WVEW 107.7. LP Brattleboro, your community radio station. We broadcast every Friday at 2 and every Wednesday morning. And you can also find us wherever you want to subscribe to your podcasts. Have a great weekend, everybody.